Welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swale. Today, I am joined by Representative David Spiller of House District 68, which spans across 12 counties here in Texas. He serves on multiple committees, including as co-chair of the Texas Energy Fund Advisory Committee. Representative Spiller, how are you?
I'm great, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Of course. It's always a pleasure it's a pleasure to do the show, and it's a pleasure to speak with people like you. So I gave, obviously, that's maybe the shortest intro that I could possibly give. But the show's not about me, it's about you. So could you give me just a little bit more background about sort of who you are, and we'll talk a little bit about your district.
Yeah, I'm an attorney, practice law, and live here in Jacksboro, which is one of the 12 counties in my district. I've been practicing law for 38 years. Live here with, I practice with my two sons, Mason and Reed. I've been practicing 38 years. As part of that practice, I've been the city attorney for the city of Jacksboro for over 30 years. I've been general counsel to our hospital district for over 30 years. I've also served, as far as public office, served as a school board trustee here at the Jacksboro ISD for 26 years. I think that's more than anybody else in the legislature. So I do that. As part of my practice, I do a very broad practice, do a lot of litigation. Also, I'm an advanced credential mediator, mediated over 1,000 cases. And so I live here with my wife, Ginger. She's a retired teacher of 31 years, and live here with my two sons, their wives, and most importantly, my 4 grandkids.
So you're a private practice attorney. You're a state representative. You are or were the city attorney.
I still am. Yeah.
Still am city attorney, and also general counsel for the local hospital district. Is that right?
Correct. I do a lot of healthcare related work also. So
That's
yes.
That's a lot of lawyering. I don't know. I think you might be the most. That's the most lawyering I've ever heard of anybody doing.
Well, I've got somebody said, "Are you still practicing law?" Because you go to the legislature and everybody either thinks that you died or you just moved to Austin, and sometimes it feels sometimes it feels like both. But I said, "No, I've got 3 jury trials between now and the end of the year, so no, I'm still busy. I've got 2 depositions later this week. I've got a mediation, so still trying to do some of those things that pay the bills."
Yeah, I mean, geez, that is really a lot. And I mean, it's also admirable that a lot of it is, it's public service, the city attorney and the general counsel for the hospital district. That's, that you're really working for your community, and that seems obvious in all that you're doing. So House District 68, which I mentioned, it spans 12 counties. Now, aside from the fact that must be a logistical challenge, let's say, when it comes to campaigning, tell me a little bit about your district.
Well, it starts up on the Red River. I've got Cook, Montague, and then down to Jack, where I live, Young, Throckmorton, and then through redistricting, I lost 17 counties out to the west and northwest, but kept those 5, but turned south and picked up 7. So I have 12 in all, and the new ones: Shackford, Eastland, Brown, Comanche, Mills, San Saba, and Lampasas. So it's 300 miles from one end to the other. I bought a new set of tires for my truck a couple of weeks ago. We put a lot of miles on the vehicle.
I can imagine, for sure. And this was so you were a freshman representative this past session, is that correct?
Second term. Yeah, I came in on a special election in 21, but
Okay.
once you stay for 3 or 4 specials, then you feel like you've been there forever. So and then I ran, and we had redistricting after that. I ran in the new district and then just won in the primary again in the new district. So
well, congratulations on that. I suspect that you'll do well. So I guess I can only imagine that looking at the map of your district, and as you just described sort of where it is, it spans a rather large area, generally pretty sparsely populated, if I'm not mistaken, not a lot of like large urban areas. So I assume that there's a lot of agricultural and ranching happening. Is that right?
Yes, a lot of ag, ranching, oil and gas, all those type things that you would typically have in a rural district. So it's a great district, but it makes it easier for me to represent them because pretty much everybody's kind of in the same boat. I don't have issues generally where what's good for one county is not necessarily good for the other. So that helps me and allows me to kind of speak as a unified voice for everyone.
Yeah, that certainly makes your job a little bit easier for sure. And I mean, if they're all, yeah, that makes sense. So, what are your policy priorities going into this next session?
Well, I carried this past session, carried or in the special, carried HB 4 and passed in the first and in the second and passed as SB 4, which I think is the strongest border security bill in the history of our state and history of our nation. So I've been very involved in border security. I'd like to continue to do whatever we need there. I think what we do depends on who wins the presidential race in November. But assuming President Trump does, there's some things that we can still do here in Texas to function better and to do what we need to do. So border security is still a big issue. The foreign ownership of land issue is big for me. I carried Bill HB 4006 last session, and I thought it best met the needs of what we needed to do, and I felt like I'm uh, the person to carry that because I understand the issues very very well. Being a practicing attorney, doing a lot of contested real estate matters, owning the oldest family-owned title company in the state of Texas, Pillar Title, and started in 1888. And also, I do a great deal of forming of entities, LLCs, and things of that nature, and operating them through the process with the Secretary of State's office. So I understand some of those issues. It's somewhat complicated. It's not as simple as people think, as far as just ban certain countries from owning land in Texas. It's just not that simple. So anyway, I've got that. I certainly want to do something with power generation to make sure that we've got sufficient, dispatchable, affordable energy here in Texas, and us to improve on what we're doing there. And certainly water is a huge issue in my district. Texas is in dire need of more water and better water sourcing and what we do there, our processes. So we've invested in that in broadband. We've invested that in energy. We need to do a better job investing that in for water, because you can't have growth. We have what, 1,100 people on average a day coming into Texas. We continue to have water needs. We will continue to have that. And we have got to invest in water to sustain our growth and sustain the eighth best economy in the world. So
Yeah.
some of those things, also election integrity. There's some more things we need to do there. And certainly some things with rural healthcare to make rural healthcare and healthcare in general more affordable for everyone.
Yeah, I've heard that water is pretty important for people, so that's good. I'm glad that we're focusing on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of those, and we can just start at the top with border security.
All right.
Obviously, that's such a huge news item with the national election happening, and recent reports of I think it even happened in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, the group of Venezuelans harassing, taking over. I think they took over a hotel or something like that. In El Paso. Um, and I'm wondering sort of your thoughts on that, what Texas can do to, what more can it do? And what changes depending on, what changes should we expect depending on who wins the election, whether it's, the Harris Walls or the Trump Vance, how does the approach change? How does the strategy change?
Okay. Well, first of all, what we can do is enforce and be allowed to enforce SB 4, the bill that I carried the last time to prevent illegal entry, illegal reentry, and violation of an order to return. So that case is not, we've not had a trial on the merits, but it's already been to the Fifth Circuit and to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then back to the Fifth Circuit. We had a hearing on that in New Orleans in the Fifth Circuit for temporary enforcement of that. And it's been a while since that hearing. I was at the hearing in New Orleans, but I anticipate a ruling on that very soon, and anticipate a good ruling. It's in front of a three-judge panel. And so I anticipate that they're going to allow the temporary enforcement of SB 4. That will make a huge difference. And then, of course, we'll go forward with the trial of the case on the merits. And so that's one of the best things that hopefully is going to happen soon. But I think there's some things that we in Texas can do insofar as having a border force, something that probably having DPS do a great deal of the work and so forth. That's not really what they were trained to do. They've done a fantastic job through Operation Lone Star, and Governor Abbott's done a great job. But I think we as legislature need to create a border force that could do some of that, and where they're trained specifically for that purpose, and to work with border patrol as we have and as we've continued to do over the years. But I think that it'd be a more efficient use of our funding to do that. And I think we also need to invest in even more so in our Texas military department. By doing so, we can do that, and the governor would have more authority over some of those things rather than just being at the whim of what the president says. Because what we have now is not really the most ideal situation. So if there's some things along that, we can do e-verify for other local governmental entities, things of that nature. There's also one state in particular I know of charges monies that leave our country and go to another country.
Yep.
And so we could charge a fee for doing that, as these other countries do as well, to defray some of the other costs that we're incurring, because we can't continue, whether it's Venezuelans or whoever it may be, coming in and doing things that they shouldn't. It's, those are things that should not be happening. And if our federal government were doing their job, and if our borders were doing her job, then we wouldn't be in this mess. So we as Texans have to step up and protect Texas. And so those are just some of the things that off the top of my head that we could do, especially that we do if President Trump is elected. And if not, then, there's a few other approaches that we might take as far as determining immigration status and some of those type of things. It depends how much pushback and how much continued failure of the federal government that we're going to have. Hopefully, we won't have that working forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the border crisis, a lot of people do focus on the big news catching headlines of, Venezuelan gangs taking over whatever building or whatever the story may be. Obviously, there's tragedies where people lose their lives through murder or whatever by an illegal immigrant. The crime is a terrible aspect. What other negative side effects are there from the open border policy that we've been experiencing?
Well, I mean, where do we start? I mean, we've got fentanyl. We've had enough fentanyl come into our country to kill every man, woman, and child in the country.
Yeah.
We have, and we know that so many people, especially young people, have lost their lives to that. It's a huge threat, is a huge problem, continues to be, will continue to be. Aside from we have human trafficking at a level that we've never seen before, women and children being trafficked, and our federal government is just turning a blind eye toward that, because that's one of the effects of open borders. The other, certainly, whether criminals, but I mean, we're talking about documented terrorists coming in at record levels, and those are just the ones that we know about. We don't even know what we don't know. We know others are coming in, but I've said that unfortunately we're going to have another 9/11 type event in this country, and it's going to make 9/11 look like a bottle rocket fight. I mean, there are so many terrorists pouring into our country that we're going to have problems. We're going to have one or more other events, and we just can't sustain that. In addition to having, again, documented murderers, rapists, child molesters pouring across our border. The federal government's not checking for those. They're not on if they're not on a worldwide watch list, we're not picking them up, and they're coming across at places other than a port of entry anyway. So we have got to do something to scare them.
Yeah. Is there, so with SB4 and everything that you're talking about and bolstering that stuff, whoever wins the presidential election, I'm wondering if you feel, or, over there at the Capitol, how people are talking about it, if the Trump Vance ticket wins, does Texas get to sort of relax a little bit, or do you still build on the momentum? Do you still keep pushing for more border security enforced through Texas?
Right. I think the first thing that I would be hopeful for is that maybe the federal government can agree to reimburse Texans their hard-earned money that we've spent doing the federal government's job in trying to secure our border. I shudder to think what would be happening if we didn't have Operation Lone Star and what Governor Abbott has done. who knows how bad it would be. I can't imagine being worse than it is, but just think about that. And so certainly we're having to spend billions of dollars in doing so. We're entitled to get that money back from the federal government because we're spending out we're spending money to do their job.
Yeah.
So certainly that would happen. But yes, I think we continue to build the wall. I think we continue to cooperate because law enforcement in Texas, Operation Lone Star, DPS, border counties, law enforcement in those counties, we have a history of working with U.S. Border Patrol. We will continue to do that. And so I think we'll try to work hand in hand. I don't blame those folks as far as Border Patrol for what's happening. They're doing what they're directed to do from the top, and that's from President Biden and Border Czar Harris.
Yeah.
So I don't fault those folks. They're doing the best job they can under very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the foreign ownership of land, which is something that, it gets news every once in a while, right? And, I've talked to even some Democrat representatives about, and it seems like there's some support there as well. It's not necessarily just a partisan issue. And they may think about it slightly differently than the Republican side. But it does seem like there's some bipartisan support. What is your view on the foreign ownership of land? Why is that important, and how far should we take it?
Well, it's important because it's a huge threat, and it only, again, let's be clear. Under my bill, under HB 4006, the last session, we're not targeting individuals. There were some bills in the past that talked about citizens that or people that were citizens of other countries that are designated, not just all foreign countries, but those that are designated in the U.S. Threat assessment that's published annually, that's online for anyone and everyone to see. And so we're talking about countries from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Those are the ones. And if you read that report, it's a very easy read. It's about 21 pages long, but it details exactly why these countries are listed on that threat assessment and why we need to prohibit those countries or entities that are controlled by majority controlled by those countries. And so we need to prohibit that because in 2022, there was a U.S. study that showed that basically 1/3 of all agricultural land in the United States was owned by foreign entities. And the real problem is that, and that's 2% of all the land in the United States altogether.
Yeah.
So the real problem is more and more they're locating next to or adjacent to or somewhat contiguous to military installations that pose a threat to our national security. That's the real problem, aside from some of the other issues. So anyone that's an American should say, look, we need to protect our sovereign. We need to protect our country. We need to protect our military installations. And so that's why we need this bill. And my view is the bill that I had, I thought best addressed the issue. I'm not disparaging any other bills, but my bill didn't target, well, we don't do that. But my bill didn't target individuals. They don't target individuals that have dual citizenship or any individual. There's nothing targeted there. It's not limited to agriculture property. It's anything, and there are reasons for that. It's not limited to surface. It could be minerals as well. It's not limited. There's just a number of things, and it's not limited to purchase of property. It could be a leasehold interest of property. So all of these kind of concepts, as far as the distinctions between ownership and the nature of property in Texas, I feel, like I say, as I've practiced law and done contested, I handle a great deal of contested real estate litigation. I own a title company. I deal with all of these type of things with the Secretary of State's office because, quite frankly, it's very difficult to determine, okay, well, who owns an entity? Who controls an entity? Because if you go to the Secretary of State's website, you're going to see a listing there of who the officers are or who the managers of an LLC would be, but you don't know who the members are of an LLC. You don't know what the ownership is. You don't know who the shareholders of any corporation are. There's no way for you or any of us to ascertain that information by looking at anything.
Yeah.
And so it's a tricky process. And the good news is I've worked through with a lot of stakeholders whether it be the Texas Land Title Association, the Realtors Association, the Mortgage Bankers Association, a number of interested parties to come up with the best bill that addresses the concern but doesn't punish people. For example, there's some of these that just say, well, they lose their property, and it's like, no, no, no. Under my bill, the Attorney General's office is that if they suspect that this has happened, they can file a suit. Everyone's entitled to their day in court. They can do discovery to find out who owns what. But if it's determined that someone has violated this statute, then the court would appoint under Chapter 64 of the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code a receiver, and the receiver would sell this property. But the first funds that would come off of that would be to pay off any lender on the property. So no one is hurt or harmed other than those that have acted in bad faith.
Yeah.
And so that's what this bill does. And whether it's that bill or whether it's something similar to it, we absolutely have to.
Yeah, so I mean, I can certainly, and I think most people can wrap their heads around the idea of protecting the land around, sensitive areas like military installations, perhaps also critical infrastructure, whether it be energy or whatever. Does it need to go further than that? I wonder. Does it need to be, is that the only threat from foreign entities, adversaries, I should say, buying land in Texas?
Yeah, here's the thing. Our Texas property code for 150 years has allowed aliens, as that term is defined, people that are not U.S. citizens to purchase land here. So
Yeah.
this doesn't change that, except and only to the extent that this bill addresses it as far as entities that are controlled by these four countries. And it's currently four, but that could change depending on what the risk assessment instrument is that comes out from year to year. It doesn't name, my bill doesn't name those four countries, but if you look at that assessment, you know what those are.
Sure.
But we have other countries that invest in oil and gas. We have other countries that participate in things. As long as those folks are good partners and good neighbors and don't pose a threat to us, I think that's fine. It's when you read that threat assessment document and you understand what these countries and these bad actors are doing, we don't need those folks owning land in our country. And the flip side is, do you really think that China, Russia, North Korea, or Iran would let the federal government, our government, own property on their soil? No way. They're not about to.
Yeah, I would imagine not. I would imagine they would have it would have stopped way before it even started, is my guess.
Right.
So are there concerns about, I often read about, the I don't know, transformers and other electrical equipment being produced in China and stuff like that. And, that's a totally separate issue, and not necessarily have a question about that specifically, but, it does relate to the energy sector, and, buying land next to critical infrastructure like power plants perhaps might be an issue. And you serve on the Texas Energy Fund Advisory Committee. You recently put out a joint statement with Senator Charles Schwartner, talking about needing needing more deliberate, transparent, and prudent review process for the Texas Energy Fund. So there's still, people are concerned about the grid as always, for different reasons. What's going on with that? What was the purpose of that press release?
Well, first of all, let me talk about the issue in general as far as
Please.
energy, why we need the Texas Energy Fund, and why we've authorized, and the taxpayers have authorized through a constitutional amendment, to authorize $5 billion to be invested in dispatchable, affordable energy. And it's because we need reliable energy. And we're currently, if you look, we're at about 85,000 megawatts at any power at any given moment. Pablo Vegas with ERCOT has come out and said, look, by 2030, that's just 6 years away by my math, it's going to require 150,000 megawatts.
Yeah.
Well, that's a huge difference. And it's kind of, I liken it to, I'm dating myself, but the movie Jaws, when the guy in the thing, and first time he sees a shark, he turns around and says, we're going to need a bigger boat. Well,
Yeah.
We're going to need a bigger boat. We've got to do what we can. And my biggest concern is, after we invest in this and do this through low interest loans and encourage the construction and the generation of what needs to take place is that what happens between now and the 3 to 4 years that it takes to get these things completed. And I'm very concerned about that. And so we're moving as quickly as we can. There are benefits to early completion and some of those type things. But through this process, and it's a new process, and we passed it this last session with this bill and with the Texas Energy Fund, and we're trying to move as quickly as we can. And sometimes there's some missteps, but we did have through the PUC, they contracted with an entity to oversee that selection process, who we select to do these jobs and to do these things. And so there is a due diligence period that is going on now, but the initial selection of these are the candidates. We looked at the applications, and these are the ones we think best meet and best qualify for what we're trying to do. In the process, there was one of those, an application that was put out that was an application with NextEra Energy and also a group called Eagle Power. And after the selection been done, initial selection, before the due diligence, then NextEra says, "Hey, wait a minute, we didn't authorize that, and we didn't know anything about it." Okay. Then we got and then we have Eagle Power that says, I mean, when we find out that the lady that's the principal of Eagle Power was previously convicted of fraud related to her previous position at another power company. So those are things that probably should have been detected from the onset, would have been picked up in this due diligence for certain. But the very fact that they made the list is troubling. And so our job on that committee is an advisory committee, is providing oversight, is just to make sure that all of the processes we have in place are proper, are transparent, and allow us to be good stewards of taxpayer money.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I like to hear some people are watching out for some taxpayer money.
Yeah.
So I want to be respectful of your time. We had talked about water, so we'll talk about that, and then we can sign off. So obviously, a lot of agriculture and minerals and ranching stuff like that in your district. I live in Austin, and we're always talking about water and what are we going to do about water. Water is important to human life, I think. And with all the people moving to Texas, what is the state of our water? What can we do? How do we get more water? How do we save it? What's the approach there?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted approach. And I was on a panel last week with Senator Charles Perry, who knows he's forgotten more about water than I've ever known. So he does a great job. And we talked about a number of things. And just like we've invested in rural broadband, which is important, and we still need to do that, especially for my district in rural Texas, how important that is. But also, we've invested in that. We've invested in energy. We likewise need to continue to invest, and we did the Texas Water Fund, and that's very important and is meeting some of those water needs. But I think we need to do more. There was a concern that we would be short of water in Texas with the growth that we're having and the economic drain on what we have, is that we'd be short of water by the year 2070. Senator Perry said the other day, he said, that's not right. It's actually about 2050. So there's a lot that we need to do, and we need to invest in that as Texans to make sure, because for us to continue to grow and be the 8th greatest economy in the world, we have to have water. We have to have sustainable water. And so it's back to your question. There's several things we can do. Certainly there's demand issues. There are things that are where we're doing desalination of water on the coastline, and we have some good processes. That's not cheap. It's somewhat expensive. But we also, even if we do that, we have a problem of transportation. We've got to get it from point A to point B, and sometimes that's a problem. There has to be conservation. We do have to stress that. There's some things that we can do. And so many cities, we don't like to talk about it, but so many cities are using, we're treating wastewater and treating it. We have the technology, but again, costs money.
Sure.
to do what we need to. So much of that we're reusing water. We've also got to do something relative to groundwater. Groundwater is a big thing because we think about groundwater. We have aquifers that are not, there's more going out than coming in. They're not refilling at the level that they need to. But also 55% of the water that we use in Texas is groundwater. I was unaware of that. I would think most of it is surface water, but it's not. It's groundwater. It's water underground. And so much of that is used for agricultural purposes. So we need to be able to strike a balance between human consumption and agricultural purposes and commercial purposes to make sure that we're best using our water. And we also, I would say, at some point, we've got to be able, at least in my district, this doesn't necessarily apply to other counties and other districts, but in my district, we can actually build more lakes. We can build reservoirs. And back when I became the city attorney many years ago, one of the first projects we had here in Jacksboro was to build a new lake. And even though at the time I thought it took a while, and it was after the fight and everything that we went through to get it, that moved at light speed compared to what you could today. If you want to start and said, I think we want to build a lake out here, and even if everyone's in agreement with it, the best estimate is it would take you 40 years from today before you could have that lake completed. And that's through the requirements through the Clean Water Act that the federal government has. We're all for clean water, but the restrictions that they have and that the EPA has, that the EPA passes on to TCEQ, are overburdens. And I understand, as far as interstate commerce, if water is flowing from one state to another, that the federal government should have some say and some control over that. But with the exception of a couple of rivers in Texas, that flow into Oklahoma or Louisiana, and we could have an interstate compact agreement between them. But every drop of water goes in from Texas, eventually, if it's not consumed, goes into the Gulf of Mexico. So I don't know why the federal government has any authority over us as Texas. We ought to be able to determine our own water policy, our own rules, and do what's best for Texas. And so at some point, we're going to have to pull the trigger on that. Under the 10th Amendment, we absolutely have that right. And someone's going to have to pull the trigger and say, federal government, we like you, but you don't get to tell us what we do with our water and how we gather our water, how we anything that we do with our water.
Yeah. 40 years. I mean, if you were saying if 2050 is sort of the breaking point, 40 years is a little bit too long.
It is. It is. Yeah. And we've got to do something.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Representative David Spiller of House District 68, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on before we sign off?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity and look forward to a great session. I'm optimistic and think we're going to get a lot of good things done for Texans. And I look forward to doing that for Texas and especially for my district.
Yeah. Is there any social media or website that you wanted to share?
The best way to follow what we do is on Facebook is Representative David Spiller. And so I would encourage people to do that. And if they have any questions, concerns, or issues, feel free to contact my Capitol office. I have a great staff with Susanna Feather and Paige West, and they do a fantastic job.
They do. You do have a great staff. They were very easy to work with. So keep up the good work to them if they listen to this. Representative David Spiller of House District 68, I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Brad.